Let's get back to this then, because concerns over school safety has nearly 3%, or as nearly 3% of the staff at the country's schools are flagged for criminal activity. This is contained in the new report by the background screening provider TPN. Now, sexual offences is among the crimes faced by 2.95% of school staff. To tell us more about this research is Ashleigh Laurent from the TPN Legal Counsel then as well. So, Ashleigh, thank you so much for the time. Appreciate it here. Let's just talk about these results, if you will. Just unpack them for us and give us an overview of these findings. 3% of schools screened had criminal records?
Good afternoon, Arabile. Thank you very much for having me. Yes, so as you've indicated, based on the verified checks performed by TPN, between March 2024 and February 2025, 2.95% of school staff screened were flagged for possible illicit activity. What we mean by illicit activity is that it indicates that you have a possible criminal record. This is a slight decrease from the previous year, which was 3.08% in the previous year, but it's still a point of concern because it would indicate that 1 in every 34 school-based staff members have a criminal record. It's important to note, though, that this isn't limited to educators alone, as legislative requirements would show that you should verify all your staff who are in contact with children and other vulnerable persons. So it would be educators, ground staff, tuck shop staff, coaches, new hires or temporary hires. And that's what the data currently indicates, Arabile.
Well, I don't know if you could put this into perspective for us, Ashleigh, because 3% sounds like a small number, and some might say, well, okay, it's a small number, we can fix that. But are you able to translate that into exactly how many people that actually is, how many school staff that is?
So, Arabile, this is based on the verified checks performed by TPN. Given the sensitive nature of this data, the number is handled by our data team, but as we've previously indicated, would translate to 1 in every 34 school-based individuals having a criminal record. And of that 2.95%, 1.22% would have criminal records relating specifically to abuse and crimes of sexual nature, wow, which, although a troubling statistic, it's still an improvement from the previous year of 2.63%, but it's still, again, a point of concern. And then in addition to that, we see crimes, violent crimes and serious crimes, that's including assault, drug trafficking, housebreaking, and also murder.
Are you able to share why this happens? Why do we even have this? Is it because those background checks are not actually being done in hiring? I mean, I'm not sure if you have that and can tell from the data.
Absolutely, Arabile. I think it's important to note that the South African Council of Educators have made it a requirement from 2019 that educators provide a police clearance certificate upon registration. But it's also imperative for schools to note that it is also a legislative requirement in terms of the Children's Act and the Criminal Law Sexual Offences Related Matters Amendment Act, that the head of school, your principal, perform these checks on all staff. So that is not limited to educators alone. Anyone who would come into contact with minors or other vulnerable persons should be checked. And I think it's important to note that we see the checks at the outset, but criminal records do in fact change. So TPN would call on schools to continue these checks if they can, because criminal records are ever changing. And we want to ensure that teaching staff and school staff are verified against the National Register of Sex Offenders, the National Child Protection Register, and also in terms of the South African Police Services database.
Does this mean that the schools themselves are actually breaking laws and rules themselves, because that would put them in breach and knowingly put this forward? Or are they hiring these people who have now perhaps hidden these criminal offences or possible criminal offences that they've committed?
It's a very good question, Arabile. I think it's perhaps a lack of understanding on the part of the schools of the legislative requirements. But it's also on the part of the employee to be absolutely honest upon applying for a position at the school. And if something changes, coming forward to the school and saying, look, this has happened. And so that the school can timeously address it. Employees are required to be honest. So it's a bit of both, Arabile.
Yeah. And this is going to be the hard question, unfortunately, then, Ashleigh. I mean, is there any direct correlation here as well with the school violence that we see, or the violence in schools, whether it be perpetrated as sexual offences and abuse, as you made note of, with the high number that we see in our schools right now? Does the two link? Because one would think that it possibly does.
It's possible, Arabile. So I think it's imperative to note that there is the possibility that in fact these do link. We would not have the data to indicate that, but it is a possibility that these two are in fact linked.
Yeah, and I mean the importance then of creating a legal framework that is stronger. Is that what needs to be done here, or is it better policing? What do we need to do to ensure that this is sort of maintained or drops down to absolutely zero, really? Because even just under 3% is 3% too many.
Arabile, I think it's a bit of everything here. So we know that the Department of Justice and Development are reviewing the Criminal Law Sexual Offences Related Matters Amendment Act and the clauses pertaining to privacy regarding the National Register of Sex Offenders. They've indicated that they are going to take a phased approach in the release of that register. The first phase being for schools and any institution that may be working with children. The second phase for the remaining general employers. And that is a start. I think it's also imperative for schools to continue vetting. And also it's imperative to note that there's also an obligation to report any reasonable suspicion to the National Register of Sex Offenders. I think there's a lack of understanding in timeously reporting even the reasonable suspicion. If you see someone involved in a WhatsApp group that may be grooming minors, it's on the school to timeously report. There's an obligation to timeously report that to the National Register of Sex Offenders, to the National Child Protection Register, so that they can follow the procedure on their end.
Yeah, let's just talk very quickly, if you may, as a final question, just about the red flags as well in your screening methodology that you perhaps see immediately as showing something like this either being hidden or schools not reporting.
So I think the major red flag is obviously when schools don't timeously report, and then that educator may go on to another institution. That's something of concern. But in addition to that, it's the question of honesty on the part of the employee. So ensuring that they come forward and say, I have this background, and I've had this. Remember, it's only crimes of a sexual nature where that staff member would be requested to not be in contact with a child or other vulnerable person. They would then be moved to another position where they would not necessarily be in contact, if possible. Otherwise, their employment would be terminated. But it's really dependent on the nature of that charge. And how serious that offence was, how long ago that offence was. So I think the best thing that can be done is absolute honesty, but also absolute honesty on the part of the school in timeously reporting that to the National Register of Sex Offenders and to the National Child Protection Register. Such
an important conversation as well here to be had. And I think the other side that perhaps isn't always considered. Ashleigh, appreciate the time. Thank you so much for sharing this insight then with us. Ashleigh Laurent is TPN's legal counsel there, as we just talk about the concerns then that come through, particularly in school safety. Nearly 3% of staff in the country's schools then have been flagged for some sort of criminal activity.